Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. Hope you enjoy. Story number 1, Diggy Diggy Hole, written by MathWiz617. Digging was a time-honored tradition for Dakvar. Their young were given a shovel for celebration on their first solar revolution, a pickaxe for their third. Disputes were settled by digging holes, contests won by excavating quarries. So, when the Terrans claimed the newly discovered star system at nearly the same time as Dakvar, the reasonable response was to propose a contest, where the winner gets the right to settle the system. The Terrans, apparently glad to have avoided a pointless war, asked for the rules. What was transmitted was simple. The innermost planet in the system was chosen as the contest grounds, due to the entire planet being solid. Both species would start on the equator, approximately 90 degrees apart. The objective was to dig. The winner would be the species that displaced the most material from below ground level. The contest would last one solar revolution. It would be easy, the Dakvar High Council reasoned. Terrans were not regarded as highly in the galactic mining community. Dakvar had thousands of years of digging experience and advanced machines made specifically for mining, digging, and other displacement-related activities. There was no foreseeable reason to lose the contest. And so, the start date arrived. Machines were deployed, pickaxes were swung, and any old grudges still held were buried in the joy of digging. By the halfway mark, the Dakvar hole was about 75% of the way to the planet's core. The Dakvar chief supervisor was pleased as he descended into a seemingly endless depths. Yes, some machines had been ruined by solar activity. Those were acceptable losses. Yes, some of his people had overtaxed themselves and died. They would be hailed as heroes. What mattered now was the whole. The contest was almost over. Just a few more planetary revolutions to go, and he could almost taste victory. As he stood on the planet's core, a massive ball of pure titanium, he began to weep. The tears ran from his face, both proud of his people to have come this far, and sad that this was likely their pinnacle of success, as the Terrans would say. It didn't last long, though, before he felt a shift, another larger jolt. A third came shortly after, and the chief supervisor was left hanging by his safety harness over a massive void. Once he was safely returned to the surface, his first order of business was to visit the Terran excavation. What he saw as he approached was beyond anything he could believe. The core was being broken down and loaded onto ships. The Terrans had managed to dig a hole deep enough and wide enough to hollow the planet. He was met by his Terran counterpart at the camp near the edge of the excavation. The human female congratulated him on a hard-fought contest. The chief supervisor asked how such a feat had been accomplished. Well, the human began, our forces were hard-pressed at first to even compare to your progress. We put the word out to assistance was required, and 3 Terran communities answered the call. Ancient groups, but quite dedicated. Anyway, we put on some music, handed them their tools, and the result was what you see today. Music? You mean the constant rhythm sound outside? The chief supervisor listened to what had seemed to be an unproductive noise as the human nodded. There were words repeating again and again. He began to understand the message of the music. I'm a dwarf, and I'm digging a hole. The music led to your people's victory, he asked. Rock and stone was the only response. End of story. Story number 2, Caution Required, written by Rosie013. Derax flattened himself in a doorway as his foot accidentally nudged a piece of litter, causing it to skitter out of cover and into the street. Fool! Don't draw attention to yourself, lest you attract them! The pounding of his heart felt painfully loud as he pushed against his tight chest. Slowly, he found that he could breathe again, as quietly as could be managed. Had he been noticed? With more than a little caution, Derax peeked from his hasty hiding spot and examined the once quaint town that was his home in a slowly fading daylight. Beautiful artisan-crafted buildings had been defaced with time and hasty newer constructions. Rubbish and plant growth threatened to overwhelm what had once been a scenic, slow, but steady main street. Even this particular familiar building felt strange and unwelcoming to him compared to a year or so ago, as its tacky, broken neon sign flickered to half-life above him. Then he spotted one of them facing away from him a little further on. Its gaunt shape resembled his own, but its slow, mindless wandering, almost saunter, gave its identity away. Dirax held back his revulsion silently as he recalled the first time he had seen one. If it turned around, he knew what he would see. The inevitable wall-eyed stare was not something he could ever forget. It was covered in somewhat formal, casual clothes, if a little faded and ripped in some places, and it was alone. He could handle one of them on their own, especially if he caught it by surprise. But they were almost never alone. A hard but necessary lesson learned by the town's dwindling populace. This must be a straggler then. The rest of its horde must be nearby, down the side street or inside one of the nearby shop fronts. One wrong move, and the straggler would alert others, drawing the rest down upon Dirax, and that was something he didn't need to handle just now. He might only barely gotten away the last time that happened. Steadying himself, he pushed onwards down the street, all the while keeping a close eye on the straggler, lest it turn around at the inopportune moment. Dirax had to go on. He had made his home just outside of town and couldn't afford to turn back without the supplies he'd come for. There was nowhere else in walking distance he could get them if he failed. Not for the first time, he cursed his poor luck that he didn't have the means to fix his broken car. That would have made getting around much faster and avoiding them much easier. He was almost at the point when he would be closest to the straggler when disaster struck. The noises of a small commotion back the way he came ripped the evening quiet asunder. Anyone and everyone in range instinctively turned to look. Dirax rose. Now most certainly in his peripheral vision, the smallest movement would catch its eye. Time stood still as the moment passed, and the straggler looked away, ready to resume its saunter. Then the rest of the horde shambled out of the building nearest to it. Damnation! A mismatched bunch. Some looked like they had spent too long in the sun. One even limped a bit. But it was a truly immense individual that obviously led this particular group. And his eyes pierced deep straight into Dirax's soul through his own. There would be no escape, so running wasn't an option. With a world-weary but internalized sigh, Dirax knew his own shopping would have to wait just a little longer, while he helped this latest group of tourists, wishing the whole while that they left him alone while he was off the clock. End of story. Story number 3, A Different Kind of Magic, written by adeptbubbles. We had found them quite by accident, a muted world nearly invisible to our eyes, a world loaded to bursting with that poisonous element, iron. Even a small amount could incapacitate a lesser mage, blocking the flow of magical energy within them. And yet, this vile, impossible world, with its angry, writhing core of burning iron, harbored life. When we looked closer, we found that the creatures of this world used no magic. They had eschewed that power, abandoned it, and in its place, they worshipped iron. They constructed great monuments with it. They lived with instructions fashioned from iron and stone. They carried it with them wherever they went, tore it from the ground wherever they could, and through its corrupting influence, these savages committed unspeakable acts of violence and malice towards themselves and their world. Though difficult, we were able to extract their history through their thoughts. We were horrified by what we found. Ever since this species' inception, they had fought tooth and nail to survive. Without magic, they turned to metal. Of metal, they wrought terrible weapons, blades to slice through their enemies, chains to confine them, and projectiles such that none could hope to escape them. But inventing these weapons wasn't enough for them. They refined them, perfected them. Blades that could carve through any material, a web of chains wrapped around their world, a crude imitation of our psionic network. projectiles that propelled themselves over continents, powerful enough to reduce entire cities to rubble. They had even invented a device able to tear apart matter itself, releasing an unstoppable tide of sound, fire, and destruction. They had used 2 of them on themselves, and then they built more, enough to reduce 100 worlds to nothing but glowing ashes. We were astounded at the fact, horrendous though it was, that these beasts had not yet wiped themselves out. Instead of destroying themselves, they pointed their weapons to the sky. They rode their projectiles on a wave of sound and fury into the void. They confined their star in a web of chains, a grand and terrible cage from which no light would escape, lest they wanted it to. They created a blade sharp enough to slice through the fabric of reality itself, holding open the gashes they made with enormous rings of iron, as if to remind the universe who had wounded it so. These monsters could not be spared. Their crimes against the divine order, against magic itself, against the universe, could not be forgiven. They were abomination, a scourge that could be cleansed only by righteous fire. Our fleets were mobilized, and we burned their world until nothing remained but glass and ashes. When it was done, all was silent, but still a sense of unease remained. The planet we had burned had only harbored life for a short time, not nearly long enough for life to have appeared there on its own, and especially not without magic. None of us said it, but we were all thinking the same thing. We had found this world by accident. It had nearly slipped by our sight. How many similar iron worlds might we have missed? End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons. Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Barkey, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Lord Azrakul, and Arcadian.